Good afternoon. Welcome. We're so glad you're here. We're doing our best to create karma to keep the weather just a little north of us. We've got a busy weekend coming up, and we're very glad to kick it off with you guys here today. I'm so glad to have our panel here, and I'm going to let each one of them introduce themselves and just say what is your connection. And we'll start with you. And just introduce yourself and let people know what your connection is to this production.
Okay. Hi. Ooh, no, wait.
Hi, I'm Mel Benjamin. I am the book writer and lyricist of Because of Winn Dixie.
I'm Bill Berloni. I'm the animal trainer and animal director for Because of Winn Dixie.
I'm Jason Hart. I'm the musical director, orchestrator, and arranger of the score of Winn Dixie, but not the composer.
I'm John Tartaglia. I'm the director of Winn Dixie.
And if you've joined us before, we usually have members of the cast to talk about the process. But, Because of Winn Dixie at Arkansas Rep, it represents the creation of a new musical. A musical that's never been seen before. A musical that's been in the creative process and the development process for quite some time, and we'll talk about that. But I thought it would be interesting today to talk about how a musical gets created. How many of you are familiar with the book Because of Winn Dixie? So a lot of you are. I believe it's read in third grade in our school system here. So a lot of you, if you have children, and particularly if you have daughters, are familiar with Because of Winn Dixie. It is a perfect play for the holidays, although not necessarily on the surface. It's not a Christmas Story or a Christmas Carol. But I think the message of Winn Dixie is even more powerful. And that sense of redemption that comes to that story is something we were talking about after the show last night. The story of Because of Winn Dixie for Arkansas Rep begins about a year ago. Dorothy Berloni, who's with us today, and our husband Bill, were the creators. They had the original idea. We were getting ready to do a production of Treasure Island, which some of you, I'm sure, saw. And the agent for the creators of Treasure Island is also your agent. And in conversation, she said, I have one of my other clients, John Tartaglia, is working on a musical Because of Winn Dixie, and they're looking for a theater where they can continue to develop it, and perhaps Arkansas Rep would be interested. And we jumped on it immediately because we knew the power of the story, and we knew the wonderful team that had already been assembled to bring this story to life and to develop the story. And so we wanted to be a part of it, and it just worked out perfectly for our holiday slot, which is, as you know, if you've been coming to the Rep for a long time, is sort of our biggest slot of the year. And we couldn't be more proud to present the premiere of Winn Dixie as our holiday show this year. So let's begin the conversation. And before we get into the nuts and bolts of Winn Dixie, we have an amazing panel. You don't get this kind of creative talent assembled at a panel, particularly very often, and probably never here on our stage here and at the Rep. So I'd like to begin with, and ask each one of them just to briefly talk about, I'll begin with Nell, since you are on the far end.
Aren't I lucky?
Now, you have written the book for Winn Dixie. Did you begin when you were younger? Did you aspire to write plays, to write musicals, or is this something that came out of some other part of your life?
I definitely aspired to write. I didn't know what. I was a big fan of, I am a big fan of poetry. And the kind of poetry I was very into is poetry with rhyme and meter and a lot of the things that when I finally graduated college were not fashionable to do in poetry. So I sort of fell backwards into lyrics in that way. I have written for a lot of different media. I've written for television. I've written games for the internet. I've written a corporate bond trading procedures manual, which my boss has called unexpectedly lyrical, so that's good. Basically, if someone would let me write it, I would write it. But I started in college not thinking I would write for a living, because you're not really sure how to go about doing that. There's no career path the way there was for, say, consulting in my college. So one of the things that happened to me was I, in college, met my current husband, and he is a phenomenally talented composer and lyricist. And we worked together on an undergraduate musical. And that was really the first time. I had loved musicals growing up, but I'm not myself a singer. And so I didn't really think of it as something that I necessarily wanted to do. But musicals and lyrics in particular are an incredible puzzle and require a lot of problem solving, which I really like. and they require me to make myself concise, which, as you can tell from this answer, is not my strong suit. So that's how kind of, and of course they are poetry, and they rhyme, and they have meter, and they have prosody. And so that's kind of, once I discovered that, I said, well, this is interesting. Then Larry and I actually, through a friend, worked on a musical called Three, which, for those of you who know Harold Prince, he produced that in Los Angeles and Philadelphia, so that was kind of our first outing. And then we did some shows for a children's theater organization in New York called TheaterWorks USA. And then we competed to be the people who wrote music and lyrics to a musical called Legally Blonde, based on that movie. And sort of since I started, I've luckily never stopped. And people that I worked with before, you know, we all want to work together again, and that's how it happens. So there's no grand plan, there's just a lot of happy accidents.
Wonderful, and let me turn this over to Bill now and ask Bill, if you've seen a show on Broadway that's had an animal, you've seen Bill's work. It's fascinating. Bill, how did that get started? How did you get started as an animal trainer and an animal director?
Well, I call myself a theatrical animal trainer, and I'm the only one who does that because I made it up. And because prior to the original production of Annie, an animal had never played a character in a play. You know, because we never, in our collective thoughts, we all have pets, we know we can't get them to sit when we ask them to sit, you know. And in film and television, you know, when you could do takes and you can get shots and do close-ups, that's all thought of. But everybody knew in their right mind that you could never get an animal to go on stage 8 times a week to do the same thing over and over again. So in 1976, there's a very famous theater called the Goodspeed Opera House in East Haddam, Connecticut, which is very much like the Arkansas Rep, you know, dedicated to theater, and they do new works. And they had chosen to do this new musical about little orphan Annie. And it wasn't until after they decided to do it and advertised it that they realized, oh yeah, there's a dog in the script. Now, I just graduated high school, I wanted to be an actor, and instead of spending my summers having fun, I became an apprentice at the Goodspeed Opera House so I could be around professionals, so I could learn about my craft. And the producer at that time realized, okay, we need a dog, so they called up New York and they said, you know, looking for dog trainers, and it was all too expensive. So then they turned to the paid staff members, the carpenters and the prop people, and said, you guys got to train the dog. And they all threatened to quit. So they needed a sucker. And I remember being called into the producer's office, who had never really spoken to me in the 2 years I was there, ushered me in, sat me down, gave me a cup of coffee, and he said to me, knowing I wanted to be an actor, how would you like a part in one of our plays and your equity card? Now, I'm 19 years old, and I thought this man is brilliant because he recognized my acting ability from the way I had been moving scenery. And I said, Mr. Price, that's great. And he said something like, all you have to do is find and train the dog for Annie. I went, okay, and ran out of his office, called my family, said, you know, my career is starting. And then this thing about this dog, commitment. The operative word, too, was for free. I had to do it for free. So I asked around, and they said, well, there's cheap dogs at the animal shelter. So I went to an animal shelter, and I found the original Sandy. Now, I had grown up as an only child on a farm, so not having brothers or sisters, until I went to kindergarten, my only companions were my dog, my cat, and I had a rabbit. So I don't remember being a lonely child because these animals were my friends, they were my family. So, you know, fast forward to the Annie situation, I thought, well, if I get a dog and I make him my dog followed me around everywhere. My dog loved me, my dog listened to me. So I thought if I can get a dog and make it think the theater is its home and the cast is its family, maybe it would work. And that's kind of what we did. And fortunately, that first experience starred a child. So putting a dog and a child together, you just let them do what they do naturally. Annie at the Goodspeed Opera House got terrible reviews, closed, and at the end, Sandy and I moved to New York City because I enrolled in NYU. And 6 months later, Mike Nichols' office called, the very famous film director. He was producing Annie for Broadway. Would I be the animal trainer? And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I would get coffee from Mike Nichols. Sure, I'll be an animal trainer. And literally 12 months after the show opened at good speed, Annie opened on Broadway, and I became a world-famous animal trainer at the age of 20. And all of a sudden, Sandy was on the cover of Newsweek magazine, and he was on the cover of the New York Times, and he was, and all this attention was given to the fact that this dog was a star. And for years, I pretended to be an animal trainer until my 4th Broadway show, and I realized I was much more talented at creating animal characters than I was at doing it myself. And that's how I got started in my career in terms of, and the fact that we always use rescue animals helps promote that cause. And, so we ultimately wanted to design the ultimate dog character play, which is how we got to Because of Winn Dixie.
It's a great story. Jason, let me move to you now. You come to this production not from the traditional world of musical theater. What's your connection and how is it? And I'll mention our composer, Duncan Sheik, is not with us. He has also, in addition to Because of Winn Dixie opening here, he has a new musical, American Psycho, opening in London. And I think it opens tomorrow. And so he's there in London. He'll be back later during the run. And Jason is here as the arranger and musical director. Tell us a little bit about your background, Jason.
My background. Well, it's true. I don't have a wealth of experience and a resume a mile long of shows that I've worked on. However, I think that I first got the bug to be a musician from musical theater. I grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee, and they did a production of Jesus Christ Superstar up near Gatlinburg in the Smoky Mountains. And my family went to go see that. I think I was 7 or 8. And I became obsessed with that. And then they did Oliver at the Knoxville Dinner Theater, and I played Oliver. So I kind of was interested in being an actor, but really the first music that I listened to were Broadway cast albums, including Annie and Hair, and I kind of gravitated more towards the rock side. But then somewhere along the line, I got kind of the rock and roll bug and decided that I was going to be a rock star one day. And I started playing guitar, but then when I went to school, I decided I was going to be a serious composer, classical composer. So as Nell said, you have a kind of an idea of what you want to do, but that evolves as you experience life, and as what opportunities does life present you. What you have to at some point kind of look yourself in the mirror and say, well, I'm good at this, I'm not so good at that, and kind of zone in. I think the people that are most successful in the arts and probably in life have a really smart sense of what their skill set is. I don't know, I've done a lot of different things, but in terms of my career, it really has been more as a touring musician. And I've toured with a number of really wonderful artists in their bands, people like Rufus Wainwright and Suzanne Vega and Duncan Sheik. And I also am involved with some progressive rock bands like Renaissance and Camel. So it's interesting because the kinds of music that I really have enjoyed, I've been able to find ways to work with those artists. And I think one is just seeking them out, and two is just always striving to do the best work I can and to be responsible and to be a good collaborator, because this is more than any genre that I'm involved in, theater is the most collaborative. The whole is definitely stronger than what's that expression? Sum of its parts? Yes. That thing. So about 4 years ago, I got a call from a friend who worked with Duncan Sheik. And this was after A Spring Awakening had become a sensation in New York. But I had been a fan of Duncan Sheik as a pop artist in the mid-late 90s. His debut album came out, I think, in 96. And maybe you guys know the song Barely Breathing, which was a huge hit. And he he was actually an artist that I thought if I was going to be a recording artist as a singer-songwriter, I would model myself on Duncan Sheik. And I on several occasions went to see concerts of Duncan Sheik and actually went to a signing that he did. So I was a fan. And so when my friend called, I mean, and then years later I had kind of a track record of playing with some important recording artists that are kind of contemporaries of Duncan. So somebody called me and said, Duncan's looking for somebody to work on this show called Whisper House at the Old Globe Theater in San Diego, one of the premier regional theaters in the country. And it was kind of someone else was going to do the job, and they had something happened. To this day, I don't know what happened, but it was kind of like, can you go to San Diego in 10 days and stay there for 3 months and do this show? And I said, sure. So I didn't audition. Duncan, he was like, are you available? I said, yes. He's like, job's yours. So I went and I did Whisper House, and this show is much more involved in terms of the role of a musical director, because we have 13 actors and we have an 8-piece orchestra. And when I did Whisper House, there were only 2 singing performers, and the orchestrations had been done already through the workshop process. So all I had to do was implement it. So what's been really exciting for me about this project is that I've been involved kind of from the ground up. From the very first workshop we did, I immediately started doing the vocal arrangements and trying to find a sound for the show. Of course, it's really the composer that finds the sound for the show, but I work very closely with Duncan and try to understand his aesthetic, his style. What does he really intend to hear? I mean, because he'll do a demo and he'll give it to me, and then I have to make it like, what would 13 disparate characters do with this song? So that's kind of an interesting challenge. Fortunately, I mean, there's really very colorful vocal arrangements in this show, and I studied composition at NYU, and I wrote a lot of choral music. So those skills came into play. I grew up in East Tennessee, so I wanted to give the score a little bit of an Appalachian flavor, a little bit of a Southern quality. So I didn't have to kind of imagine that. I kind of had it in my ear already. So I feel like I've been able to take experiences in my life and in my background and in the music that I like and enroll it into the orchestrations and the arrangements and the sound of the show. And I have a great relationship with Duncan. I mean, I'm involved in a few of the projects that he's doing, and I play in his band. And it's a good pair because he needs someone like me to kind of do the nitty-gritty work, and especially in this case where he can't be here. If there wasn't the strong sense from all of us that he trusted what I was going to do, I don't know how smoothly this process would have gone. So that's kind of a little bit about my background.
Not smoothly at all. It would not have gone smoothly at all.
And,
You're a linchpin.
And John, let's talk about, John is our director. Now, I first saw John Tartaglia on stage in Avenue Q when it was first opened at the Vineyard Theater in New York several years ago. Several years ago, John was 12.
Don't say several years ago to me.
That was one of the funniest productions I'd ever seen, and I have John's autograph from that show on my wall in my office. John, you're our director. I know you as an actor. They know you as an actor. Is this a career change for you? How do we get from Avenue Q acting to the director of our show?
Well, no, you know, for me, it's funny. I didn't see this part of my career in my viewpoint. I as a young kid I had kind of two main obsessions. One was puppetry and one was as performing as an actor. And I come from a showbiz family, and I cannot remember a time I wasn't either listening to theater, performing in theater, you know, acting out in my room. I mean, it's always been something that I've loved, and it's a very natural part of my life. And so I knew that I wanted to be a puppeteer. I knew that I wanted to work for the Muppets. I knew that I wanted to be on Broadway. Those were all things I knew, and I did not have in my I guess my front view being a director. But my mom, who's an actress, when I first told her I was going to start directing, was like, "Oh, that makes total sense." And I I didn't understand that. And she said, you've been directing yourself and others since you were a kid, because when I was like 4 years old, one of my earliest memories, and I'd forgotten about this, was I would put on these productions of shows in my backyard starring my neighbors, forcing them basically into these shows. And she tells a story of how when I was like, I guess 4 or 5 years old, I had been producing my first production of Fiddler on the Roof in our backyard. And I know, and you may have heard of this particular production, it was well known. And I had gone to like made my mom drive us to like our local bank and put up like a Crown-drawn ad for actors like willing to work for like, I'm sure it was like a cup of lemonade or something, but I put this up and I was really ready to do it. And my next door neighbor, Lori, who is also 5, and her younger sister, Kathy, who was 3, were my stars. And my mom tells the story of how I came in one day so flustered, like really upset. My mom's like, honey, what's wrong? And apparently I said, I cannot work with those actresses. And my mom said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to fire them. And I went upstairs and slammed the door to my room. I don't think I even knew what fired meant, but I did. So I'd forgotten about that, and that was a funny memory. But yeah, I think that, as a puppeteer, you are a self-director because you are in charge of your own performance, and it's one of the only kinds of performance where you are able to view your work as it's happening and correct it. And puppetry is such a collaborative art form. It's really not something that happens in a vacuum. It's an actor can stand on a stage and do everything themselves from their performance. They need a lighting designer, they need all of that, but even on a bare box of a stage, as an actor, you can control that. With a puppeteer, you're in charge of performing your puppet, voicing your puppet, choreographing your puppet, sometimes writing for your puppet, lighting your puppet. So I was always kind of involved in all those aspects, and I think as a director, you're doing the same thing. You're basically in charge of making sure the whole picture comes together to make the performance come through and touch the audience. So the short answer, I guess, is I didn't expect it, but because of my other work, what really I think launched me into it was I had the opportunity after Avenue Q to create and star in my own television series, which was amazing. And I was also the executive producer of it, and that taught me so much about personnel and working with artists to collaborate to create something. And that's actually how I met Bill and Dorothy. And they're the reason I have this job, because Bill and I really understood each other quite a lot. Bill actually did some of the animals for the show. And when Bill came on the set, we were in a very difficult time for many reasons, and I had to kind of take control. I wasn't the director of the television series, but I had to basically direct the set because one of our people wasn't working out, and I just had to do it because it was my responsibility, and I had to answer to, it was for Disney, I had to answer to Disney and make sure my show looked good. So I think he saw that I was able to get results by being kind to people and being collaborative, but also having a vision. And so suddenly I get this phone call from Dorothy, I guess 3 or 4 years later, saying we're developing this musical and we're really interested in you directing it. And I was like, are you sure you have the right number? Because I'm not Jerry Zaks. But she's like, no, she's like, we really believe you have the skill set. So that's how I got here, to be part of the show. And it's
and we are very glad you are here.
Thank you.
And now let's go back to Nell. And this is a beloved book. Where do you start? I mean, you've got to write the story and the lyrics to the songs. What's your starting point? And will this audience see a literal adaptation of the book? Or if not, why not? What's your process?
I mean, you start with the book. You read it, hopefully. And we all agreed when we read the book, I think we say this a lot, we all sort of had the same reaction, which was, although it is technically a children's book, there's a lot going on there that is on a different level from what you normally think of as a children's book. There are some very dark stories, there are some very adult concepts and conflicts, and we liked those, and they stay with you after. The book stays with you. For those of you who have read the book, it's not, it's not a plot-driven book. There's not crazy reversals and actions and a jewel heist and things like that. There's not the kind of things you think of as a plot. So you have to ask yourself at the beginning, am I going to create some plot for this book, or am I going to preserve something else about the book? So we made the choice very early on that we weren't going to create plot. We aren't going to have, as John says, we're not going to have Winn Dixie's kidnapped and stolen by a circus, and will they get him back? We were going to try to build it from the characters in the book and the themes in the book, and have the plot be a very subtle but present drawing out of those characters. So hopefully, we don't have all the characters from the original book, because that would be a very long show indeed, but we have hopefully enough that you recognize them, and we give you a little more time to spend with them and inside their heads. And you sort of move along with them. I wanted to preserve, there's a lot of unexpected humor in the book, and so we definitely wanted it to be funny. And one of my main goals is the book is touching in a way that you don't expect. It's not touching in a sort of Hallmark made-for-TV movie way, and we definitely did not want to do that. We don't want moments where people are telling each other how incredibly emotionally moved they are by this moment, because that's just lectury to an audience. You know, when you know you're supposed to be moved by this moment, and you're not moved, and you're like, this is not touching at all, stop touching me. And we didn't want that. So that's how we approach the original book.
Well, and it should be said, I think Nell, sometimes underplays how difficult it was, because as you said, it's a very episodic book. So if and it's also told from Opal's point of view. And anytime you have a book that is interior based, and I thought this, but then the character says this, it works in a book beautifully, because what she says to one character is not necessarily what she feels, and then or she'll say one line of dialogue to a character in the book, and then there'll be like 4 paragraphs about how she felt. In a musical, it's very difficult to do, because you don't want to do that kind of the character talking to the audience and saying, and then I felt this way, because that's also very boring. And because it's an episodic book and she goes to these different characters, the town is fractured in the story. No one really speaks to each other. No one has any communication. No one ever socializes. So it's really about this one girl, Opal, going to each of these people, and then by the end drawing them together. And it was a challenge, and I think Nell incredibly took that challenge on and made this beautiful musical structure that holds really well, and that was a huge challenge. I just want to give you credit publicly for that.
Thank you, John.
Now, Bill, I want to ask you, this is a story. We talked earlier about, the name of the musical isn't Winn Dixie, the name of the musical is because of Winn Dixie. This dog is the catalyst for this small town coming together. That's what I think is the joyous part about this story that you guys have created. Talk to us about what's it like to be the animal director, to what do we have to do to make it work? What are the specifics of your responsibility working with the dog? How did you find our Winn Dixie, and what's led up to the opening night coming up here tomorrow night, and what makes it different about that than just any other play that you've worked on?
It's terrifying. And interestingly enough, it's why my wife and I decided to do our own project. For many years, I would get scripts in which writers would write stuff that they thought animals could do. And then I would have to sort of come in and go, okay, now that works in the movies, because that's all our collective thought about how animals work. But on stage, we have to morph that a little bit. And so after the success of Annie and Toto, every show I do, an animal who's on stage for 7 minutes gets all the press. And I kept waiting for someone to write Lassie the musical so that we could capitalize on having a dog on stage. And after I turned 50, I was like, Dorothy, it ain't gonna happen. So my wife said, well, let's do it ourselves. And she was the one who looked through properties and found, because of Winn Dixie, as the vehicle to do this with. But oftentimes, and the first person we thought of writing it was Nell, because we had worked with Nell on Legally Blonde. And I remember meeting her and her husband, and they wrote a show in which the opening number, where we're looking for Elle Woods, the little dog Bruiser comes on stage, a little chihuahua sits center stage and has lines. He has to tell the audience where our main character is. And I looked at them thinking, are you nuts? What if this dog doesn't do that? But they worked with me to help develop that. So Nell sort of had the idea of how I worked. So, because in this project, with that much animal work, we had to devise the show around what an animal was capable of, as opposed to try and fit an animal in, once it was written. So that's where, we started 5 years ago. We had one set of, our first version of Winn Dixie were deerhounds because they looked exactly like the cover of the book. And we found they were too skitterish and they were too unnerved. So then we went to Irish wolfhounds. Well, Irish wolfhounds are gentle giants. They're not known for their brains or their energy. So, but they have a calmness and a stature that's just so moving. So we, you know, I would start developing things and show it to John and to Nell in our workshop. And so that they could start writing scenes around what a dog could do as opposed to trying to fit an animal into that. But unlike any other aspect of musical theater, where you can demo songs and people can listen to them, you know, you could do things. Everybody else's work could be listened to and arranged. My work didn't start until we got here at Arkansas Rep. And the three of us, the four of us are like, is the audience going to be are we going to be looking at the dog all the time instead of listening to the dialogue? Where do we put the dog so that doesn't happen? And we've been discovering that, which is very exciting. And all our hopes and thoughts were working. But even last night, we made a change in one of the ballads. Instead of the dog being sideways, the dog looking at the audience, and it just made the number. So that's part of having a team in which in the past, I've worked with directors and writers who I've said, well, if you do it this way, it'll be better. And they'll go, well, who are you? You know, I have more Tony Awards than you, so who are you to tell me? But this team has been working very closely with me to get those moments so that we can fulfill this story.
And John, has that affected the way you stage? I mean, you have the double challenge. You have cute dogs and cute children. And you know, there's an adage in theater about you never work with animals and children because the other actors could just be naked up there and you wouldn't notice. Has it presented particular challenges? Have you worked staging around what the behaviors dogs can do and not do, or the children's strengths? How do you approach that as a director?
Remember what Bill said before about they needed a sucker? No. No, you know what? I mean, I've worked with kids my whole life. I love kids, and I love animals, and I think it's because of maybe my work with puppetry, too. I understand, I mean, they say you should never work with puppets, too, or clowns, I probably worked with everything except for a mime at this point, so that doesn't make me nervous, although there's a mime show out there somewhere. No, you know, I think what Bill was saying is very true, and you know, this is an art form. Theater is an art form where we all come from different worlds, and the one thing that seems to be consistent in theater is there's a lot of egos. And I think you have to, when you do a show like this, where you're working with live animals and kids, and it's a new musical, and all these elements, you have to check your ego at the door. And it has to be about making the best musical possible. And I find in my past, just from Avenue Q and being part of Shrek the Musical and a few other new shows, the most successful collaborations and the most successful properties, frankly, are the ones where people leave their ego outside the door and say, we're here to create the best show possible. Because at the end of the day, you're creating a community experience. Theater is a community experience, and you have to create something that you believe, yes, you want to believe that it's enjoyable for you and that you love what it is, but ultimately you're serving your audience. And those are the people that let you know. They're the ticket buyers, they're the ones who spread the word, and if they're not enjoying their experience, then well, that's great. You created a show for yourself, and isn't that lovely? You know. But what's amazing, I think, about this team is that we all have the common goal. We all respect each other immensely, and I think that we all came on board knowing that this would be something that's never been done before. So there wasn't room for, as Bill said, well, who are you to tell me this? You know, I think that my job is less to say I'm always right as the director as it is to say, let's figure this out together and then take the best of those ideas and make it work and to guide the ship a little bit. And I remember Janine Tesori, who composed Shrek. It was a big lesson. I'm really happy I had that opportunity to work with her because she said to me something that has stuck with me. She said, I've had ushers fix my shows. I said, what do you mean? She said, I've had ushers, when we've been in a room, why isn't this working? The song is working. I've had ushers come up to me and say, look, here's why it's not working. Because I see this audience every night and I see why they're not reacting. It's this. And she's like, well, thank you. And she's put it in and the next night it works. So I believe in that too. I think that it's very easy to say, I have all the answers or, you know, but we've really been in a position where Nell's come up with a great moment for a character that I wasn't, and I'm like, that's great, let's keep that. Or Bill yesterday at one point was like, well, what if Opal came over and checked in the dog here? And it wasn't what I was thinking of, but I thought that's a brilliant idea. Yes, let's use that. You know, and that's, I think, the best kind of collaboration when there's no sense of, but you're just the writer or I'm just the director. It's a nice combination.
And there's a fifth creator in this process, which is the Arkansas rep. In that, they've taken a huge leap on faith on something that's never been done. And I can remember a conference call, because we kept saying, you've got to think out of the box on this one, you've got to think out of the box. I remember an early conference call with Robert and one of the associates, and I said, has anybody ever slept in the theater? And there was a silence. He said, no. I said, well, is there any laws prohibiting or unions? He said, no. Why? I said, because I think I'm going to be sleeping in the theater with the dogs to get them used to it on stage. And they were like, are you sure? So when you can go to a producer and say something like that, and they're like, okay, we'll leave the lights on for you. I mean, and that's how they've been, the Arkansas rep, with our process in allowing us to.
I don't know how you do that, because the idea of sleeping in the theater freaks me out completely. Like, that just creeps me out, so kudos to you.
So again, the Arkansas rep is giving us the opportunity to try things and think out of the box with 7 kids, 250-pound dogs, you know.
And after tomorrow night, we may all be sleeping in the theater, so you may, you may have company after tomorrow night's show. Yeah, there we go. Jason, one of the things, I'm going to ask Jason a question, then I want to get you guys involved and see what questions you guys have. The music for the show is beautiful. I mean, it is to me just, you know, night after night, the opportunity to hear this music and the arranging that you've done for these musicians. Which comes first?
Thank you.
And I know you'll have to speak for Duncan partly here, but does Nell provide the lyrics? How does the collaboration work? Because it seems so organic, but I don't think the two of you sat down in a room together and hammered this out. How does that work?
Well, you know, there's a very, I mean, I always hear artists getting asked, you know, which comes first. I think my sense is usually in theater that the lyrics come first, because the lyrics are very specific in a show, unless it's something off base or avant-garde or whatever. They're meant to tell the story. They're meant to reflect on what the characters are experiencing. So I think in general, lyrics or a lyrical idea come first. But what's been interesting about watching Nell and Duncan create is that I see sometimes they'll say, or John will say, or Nell will say, okay, we need something that has this kind of vibe for this scene. And Duncan will say, okay, and then he'll come up with a minute of music, a vibe. And then he'll give that to Nell, and then she'll start to write a lyric, and then he'll take it from there, and then back and forth. So that's a very interesting, and I have to say, a lot of this, although when we were in Connecticut, we were in the same room, but a lot of this happens, you know, virtually, you know, by the internet. And in fact, I know Duncan's collaborator, Stephen Sater, on Spring Awakening, they never write in the same room together. They do it apart. Sometimes, you know, you have this image of Rodgers and Hammerstein and hunkered over a piano and figuring out a song, but in the modern age, you can collaborate with somebody on the other side of the world, and it was, in fact, we have new songs.
Yeah.
We have a very not just a kind of an aside song, but a really important song in this show that came in about 10 days ago,
Yeah.
I guess. Mm-hmm. So I think every collaboration is different. In terms of my job, you know, I kind of deal with it once it's in a spot, once the song is written. A lot of times, I'll sort of sense from John, like, you know, the song is great, but it needs this. So I've had the freedom to take a song and change the groove of it a little bit, to the tone of it, to make it a little bit brighter, to make it, you know, to integrate different musical elements and to give it that personality that it wasn't necessarily there in the composition specifically, but that it was implied. And by being part of the rehearsal process, because I was continuing to do the orchestrations up until a few days ago, really, I could sort of say, oh, you know, for example, we have a song called "You Need a Woman Around." Is that the name of it? And always it was like kind of not exactly right, and I had this idea that if I had a solo violin playing, almost like you'd have in a cheesy Italian restaurant, but then I was thinking, well, but of course then you have country fiddle, which is so, you know, down home and has that sort of special you hear it and you know exactly where you are. So I had this idea, well, I'll stick that in there. And it kind of gave the song, from my perspective, a real identity that may not have been there before.
It's wonderful because it's the sound in the character's head. And as soon as it plays during her song, the whole audience kind of giggles because they can hear, I can't explain it, they can hear what she's thinking and what her next move is going to be, even though there's no words involved.
It helps tell the audience what,
What's going
where,
on.
where it's kind of going to lead you, and you need that sometimes. You need that help, and music does that. You
Yeah.
take that for granted. And
Jason also has an amazing skill, I'm going to talk you up now, for what is closest to a lyricist's heart, which is prosody and making prosody work with music. Does everyone know what I mean by prosody
No, you need
in
to
this
define
context?
that one for us.
Okay, all right. So very simply, or this is the bad definition, it's how the words fit on the music. So what you want is however the music is stressed or rising in pitch or the length of the notes should reflect, in at least a musical theater lyric, how you would actually say the words. Does everyone remember, like, My Fair Lady, how kind of you to let me come? Or there's a pop song out now, a Katy Perry pop song called Unconditionally. I don't know if all of you are familiar with that song, but say the word unconditionally with me right now. 1, 2, 3. Unconditionally. Okay, so the stress is on right? And ishtionally, Jack in the Box. There's a very specific rhythm to how you say it. When she sings it, and please forgive my singing, she sings in the refrain, unconditionally. Now, if the president got on your television set and said, today we are going to unconditionally withdraw our troops from Iraq, you'd be like, is he having a stroke? And in a pop song where you're going to hear it in your iPhone, you're going to hear it on a club, it doesn't really matter that you pick up that word right then. You'll probably hear it another 50 times in the song. But in a musical theater lyric, it's very important that you understand what the person is saying the first and only time you're going to hear it. So prosody is important. And it also has emotional resonance that people don't think about. Think about the lyric, think about I'm just a girl who can't say no. The way it's sung, I'm just a girl who can't say no. In there is sort of regret, and I'm kind of innocent, and I really wish I could say no. If he had said it, I'm just a girl who can't say no, it would be a very different, it sounds like, there are things called girls who can't say no, because that's all smushed together at the end, and I'm just one of those. It's almost more defiant. I don't quite know how to explain that, but it's a very different feel from I regret it to I'm just a girl who can't say no, what about it? And this is a very subtle point, but it does make a great deal of difference when you only have a limited number of syllables to work with. So I guess what I'm saying is the lyricist to a composer or a musical director, arranger like Jason is your worst nightmare. He or she is that annoying friend of yours who calls and is like, I think he said he likes me, but he didn't really say that. He kind of said he said we were going to see each other Tuesday, but I don't know if maybe I should wait till Friday. That's me at any given time with lyrics. And to have somebody who understands, like Jason does, how music moves a dramatic line and is willing to listen to me parse it that explicitly is a gift.
Thank you. And it's interesting because I think, and I haven't really thought about this, but one of my goals as a musical director, and one of the things I think that is lacking, and I mean, there are incredibly brilliant musical directors working on Broadway, obviously, but a lot of times you go to see a show and you can't understand the words. And my mom goes to see the show. She doesn't understand the words. Well, I mean, I'm a lot younger than she, and I don't understand the words. I don't understand the words. I go to see Book of Mormon, a big, huge hit. I don't understand the words.
You don't want to, I think, for some of it.
Well, but I mean, and the reason for that is twofold. One is because a lot of these theaters weren't built for the kind of amplification that goes on now, and I'm not a huge fan of over-miking singers because back in the day, singers had to hit the back wall, and they were trained to do that 8 shows a week. And now you get singers, they're like, I got to mark, I got to rest my voice. And really, I mean, so I think we're in an era where the technology helps us tremendously. This is a little bit of a pet thing, and Duncan shares my view, is that if you can't understand the lyrics, they're just placeholders. And so much time and care and thought goes into making those lyrics say something, mean something. So I feel it's my responsibility to make sure, to the best of my ability, I can help them be understood. And
that's sometimes the reason shows don't work, is because you don't know why that song doesn't affect you, but it's because probably subconsciously you have no idea what's really happening and you miss important information, yeah.
And as the dog trainer, I want to give kudos to Jason too, in that the composers wanted the band to be a part of this show. And originally, they were supposed to be on stage, so the audience really felt what was going on, and we ran out of room backstage. And Jason devised a way to get the band in the pit, and Bob allowed us to cut a hole in the pit. So he can be very much in tune with what's going on with the dog and the actor, so the sound you're hearing in this show is much different than's been going on at the Arc Rep, and that's all to Jason.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we run out of time, I want to see if anybody has questions. Yes, Jana.
Let me get you a mic.
Here comes a mic.
Well, this is about the dogs. I have a third grader, and she's reading the book, and we've read the book together, and her class has seen the movie. How many dogs do you have in the show? That's one question. Secondly, how important was it for Opal to bond with Winn Dixie? And third question, in the book, Winn Dixie smiles, at least Opal sees Winn Dixie smile. Does this Winn Dixie smile? Or is there, and I guess, or look like he's smiling?
The quick answer is she smiles, but only when she's really happy, so that's been cut. So she smiles in other ways, okay? We do have 2 dogs, because as I've said, every living creature has the right to be sick, and if Winn Dixie got sick, I wasn't about to put on a dog suit and go on and do the role.
Though I tried to get him to do that.
So we have a main dog, and we have an understudy dog. Third, the bonding obviously is very important. In cinema, when I do a movie, I'm behind the camera, the dog's looking at the point of view that we need it to. In theater, you wouldn't want Winn Dixie looking at Opal, looking at me for the command, and then executing it. So Opal, in this case, has to be as an adept a trainer as we are, and they don't do it just because they get commands, they do it because they love and respect. So again, out of the box, our local Opal, Julia Landfair, and her family came to our home and spent a week with us doing a Winn Dixie boot camp, okay, all at their own expense to get her up to speed. Bob had to give up one of the apartments where we're staying for the costume designer so that Julia and her family could actually live with us so they could have sleepovers. So we've been very much in making that happen, which again, is above and beyond any other preparation for any other show that I'm sure has been done here or anywhere else.
Other questions? Yes.
Does the understudy stay the understudy, or would he ever have his time? Does it matter? Are they disappointed when they're not on stage? I'm worried about the dog.
He's calling his agent as we speak. He wants a negotiation.
Well, right. No, and these guys who have been in the room, again, both dogs don't know why. All they're knowing is they're coming and having a good time and getting cookies. And when Julia felt she was closer to one dog, we made that dog the lead. Well, Taryn, who's the understudy, would sit in the corner and watch during rehearsal. And there were times where he'd get so into the scene, he'd actually run into the middle of the scene to try and do it. And it's somewhat heartbreaking to see, you know. But he gets to work with the understudy girl. So we're actually training both the understudy Opal and the understudy dog, so that in the case that one got sick, they would be prepared.
And he's got one, Taryn, who's the standby for Winn Dixie, has one big moment in the show that because we did want him to be in the show somehow, and he excels at this particular behavior. So it's always like his big featured moment. Yes. He's like putting like poison in Callie's food. I'm going to go on. Yeah.
What else would you like to ask? Yes, right up front.
Well, first of all, Bill, I'm a huge fan. I love Broadway Tales, one of my favorite books. And I'm with the Humane Society of Pulaski County, and I want to talk to you later about that. But anyway, I'm just curious, are these dogs rescues?
These dogs are not rescues, and it's the first time in my career that we had to do a show in which we couldn't use rescues. Interestingly enough, when we started doing the research, we went to Irish Wolfhound Rescue, and were interviewed, they declined to adopt to us because they felt that we would make Irish Wolfhounds too popular, and then they would become like 101 Dalmatians, and all of a sudden people would be buying Irish Wolfhounds. And Dorothy and I looked at them like, this is a Broadway show. This is not going to elevate them. And so we were forced to go to breeders and get puppies to train them. Because you don't normally find Irish Wolfhounds in rescue to begin with. But again, the Humane Group thought it was not a good idea to use rescue dogs.
And since you mentioned Bill's book, Broadway Tales, we're having an event at the Rep on Monday night. I think it begins at 5:30, if that's correct, where Bill has graciously agreed to come and visit with us and talk about what it's like to train these dogs, to talk about his book. Any of you can come and visit our website and make a reservation to come Monday night at the Rep at 5:30. We'd love to have you to come down and join us for that. We can do one more question.
Who's it going to be?
Oh yeah, parking garage is always open. Yes.
That doesn't count as a question.
That's right.
That's an easy one.
That's right. But, I'll wrap up with this then. We were, you talk about how important the audience is, particularly when a play or musical is still being developed. Even, at this point, and we have our final preview tonight, and, these guys are leaving our conversation today and going back into rehearsal. They'll rehearse all afternoon, we'll do the show this evening. They'll rehearse tomorrow afternoon, we'll do the show tomorrow evening. And we had a conversation, even the last beat of the play, the way the musical ends has changed since the previews because it ended a certain way. They saw how the audience reacted, and now it ends a different way.
When an audience comes to this, we are listening, if you come, and we hope you do. We are listening to you, and we want to know how you react. And we're in the back staring at you often instead of the show to see if you're fidgeting or looking in your program or checking how many songs are left in Act 1, and all those things that tell us that perhaps this moment is not working. So it's great for us to be here, to be able to develop a musical, because as you've probably heard here, if you don't want to collaborate, musical theater is not the job for you. I encourage you to write the great American novel. And the last collaborator in our group is the audience. And we need to know that what we're saying is what you're hearing, and that the questions we're raising are things you want to debate, and that the emotional moments are things that resonate with you. So the joy of coming to a place like Arkansas Rep is that your audience is very responsive and has been very involved and will tell us what they're thinking, both by actually telling us and behavior.
And live theater is one of the last art forms we have where a product is not just shipped and given to you, and whether you like it or not, that's too bad. I mean, a film, a television series,
you pay ahead of time,
pretty much
and
an
then that's
album, it's done. I mean, and you choose to consume it or not, and it's actually scarier, I think, to do that kind of work because it's like you kind of hope people are going to like it. With theater, what's amazing, especially, again, working at somewhere like Arkansas Rep where we're allowed to go in and make changes and update and fix and shift, is it's giving us the chance to make the best possible product based on how you, the audience, feel, which is scary, but oftentimes really wonderful because, like Bob said, we can say, ooh, that moment didn't work, but tomorrow night we're going to do this, and you throw the dice and you hope that that works the next time, which is kind of exciting.
And the book and the musical are, for those of you who've read the book, are ultimately a lot about community and what causes a community to fracture and what causes a community or family to come together, which is, I hope, why it makes for a good Christmas show, even though most of it takes place in the summer. It is, because it's about community, it has that extra level where you, the audience, we want to create a community with you. We want you to be part of it. And I think maybe part of the reason we love theater so much and that we do it in spite of all the strangeness is because we all love creating those communities, because ultimately that's how we move forward as a civilization, is together.
And I hope you will all come down between now and December 29 and see Winn Dixie. Remember, evening curtain times are always for our holiday show at 7 p.m. We've added some matinees. Please visit our Facebook page or our website. Tell your friends to come down and see this beautiful show that these wonderfully creative and talented people have created. I want to thank our good friends here at the Clinton School for hosting us, and for this panel for taking time out of their busy schedule to come and visit with you today. And thank you for being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.